What is going on, everybody, and welcome to my review for The Black Phone 2. The story for this sequel picks up 3 years after the events of the first film, and it sees Finney, now 17, struggling to cope with the realities of the horrors that he experienced at the hands of the grabber. Meanwhile, his younger sister Gwen has begun to more and more frequently have these dreams/visions about these 3 missing young boys, and so together the siblings attend a Christian youth camp to uncover the mystery surrounding their disappearances. But while there, they are confronted by none other than the grabber himself, who has grown even more powerful in death, and even hell itself could not contain his evil ambitions and bloodthirsty desire to get revenge on his adolescent adversaries. When the first Black Phone came out back in 2021, I had an interesting experience with it. I typically don't allow myself to buy into a lot of hype when it comes to really any form of entertainment, whether it be music, video games, or movies. But The Black Phone is one of the rare occasions where I absolutely failed at keeping any amount of control or limits on my levels of expectations for a movie. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I wasn't nearly as critical of Blumhouse back then as I am today. These days, you would never catch me being anything greater than cautiously optimistic for one of their projects. Reason number two is Scott Derrickson was in the director's chair, and historically I've always been a pretty big fan of his, whether it be his work within the horror genre or the MCU with the first Doctor Strange film. Even earlier this year, we got The Gorge from him, which I actually thought was a surprisingly solid, straight-to-streaming horror survival genre bender. But also his involvement excited me because he would be reuniting with Ethan Hawke. That is the actor-directing duo that gave us Sinister back in the early 2010s, which is a staple horror movie of my teenage years, and it is widely regarded as one of, if not the scariest movie of its era. And so together these two have shown before that they can deliver a unique and one-of-a-kind horror experience, which as a genre fanatic is an experience that I am always craving. And lastly, I just think the trailers sold this movie really well. They were dark and mysterious, and they really set the tone and the mood for the movie that looked, at least to my eyes, like it was going to be right up my alley. And so you combine all of these things together, and my excitement for seeing this film was set at possibly unfair and maybe even unreachable levels. And unfortunately, this excitement would be what would come around to bite me in the ass, because when I was watching it, I was hoping for and expecting to get this 10 out of 10 masterpiece of a horror movie, but what I actually ended up getting was more closer to an 8 out of 10 one. And so it was a really weird feeling to be disappointed in a movie while simultaneously really liking it. I just didn't absolutely love it like I thought I would. But now that the dust has settled and that immediate feeling of disappointment has subsided, I still do maintain to this day that it is a really good horror movie, and it's one that I've watched multiple times. It's got great rewatch value, and even though it doesn't achieve all of the hopes and dreams that I had for it, I still do think Scott Derrickson delivers that unique and one-of-a-kind horror experience that you expect to get from him in one of his films. Which brings us now to The Black Phone 2. Now, even though I do enjoy that first film, it's not one that I ever felt needed a sequel, and because it is such a tight and well done isolated story, it's not one that I ever felt really lends itself all that well to one either. So when it was announced that we would be getting a sequel, I was a bit puzzled and confused because it's not immediately obvious to me where they could possibly go with the story from here. Now, sequels within the horror genre already kind of give me cause to pause in general, especially coming from Blumhouse, and because I no longer allow myself to watch movie trailers really at all anymore, I still, even all the way up to me taking my seat in the movie theater, had no real solid clue as to what direction this sequel would be going in. And even though this movie still has a lot of things going for it that had me excited for the first film, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous in the lead up to checking it out. But before I give you guys my thoughts, I'd like to ask that while you are here, please consider giving the video a like, and if you're into movie reviews, then consider subscribing to the channel as well. I also want to stop and give thanks to you all. I just recently hit 100 subscribers here on YouTube, and I know in the grand scheme of YouTube, that's the equivalent to being a small grain of sand at the bottom of a very vast ocean, but nonetheless, The fact that one person, let alone 100, would want to watch any piece of content that I put out onto this platform really warms my heart and definitely makes me feel supported on this little creative journey that I've put myself on. This is a much needed outlet for me, and I hope that I can continue to grow in both experience and exposure and deliver you guys movie content that you enjoy watching and that I enjoy making. So I just wanted to stop and say thank you all for watching. It really means a lot to me. Now let's get into this review. So starting with the positives, and if you like from a director standpoint what Scott Derrickson has done within the horror genre in the past, then I think you will continue to do so here in The Black Phone 2. Visually, I think he's always been a compelling filmmaker. That's something that even Disney recognized, and so I don't think it's any coincidence that Doctor Strange is one of the most visually impressive films we have gotten in the entirety of the MCU. We know from movies like Sinister and the first Black Phone that he loves a good film grain filter, and I've always liked the way that he implements them in the Black Phone film specifically because he uses it as the visual cue for the audience to differentiate what is taking place in Gwen's dream world and what is taking place in the real world. And because there are a lot more dream sequences in this sequel, there's a lot of bouncing back and forth between the dream world and the real world in rapid succession. It feels a lot more stylized and makes it stand out more, in my opinion, for this film as opposed to the first one. That old school vintage look that it has and the crackling sound that often accompanies it creates this almost cozy vibe, but then you mix that with the terrors and the dangers that are taking place, and I think that's really the secret sauce to these movies and what makes them stand out so much on a visual level, and that's all a credit to Scott Derrickson's filmmaking. Probably what I enjoyed the most about this film is the iteration of the grabber that we get. You know, Ethan Hawke has given two great physical performances in both films, but you know, in the first one he kind of bounces around between a couple of personalities. He's got a happy mask, a sad mask, a scared mask. Well, in this one he is just full on nonstop rage for the entirety of the film, and obviously you don't need that to understand how evil he is. I mean, he was murdering children. That's pretty much as evil as it gets, but the tenacity and the aggression that he has for the entire runtime here just made him overall a much more scary and imposing figure in my eyes, and much more of an intimidating slasher threat, which this movie has a lot more slasher elements to it, but also the look of him is just so much more terrifying. He's got like burnt, because he's been to hell, so he's like burnt up, he's horrific to look at, and when he's coming after these people, you feel the danger a little bit more with the grabber in this film than you do in the first one, where he's a lot more reserved and subdued until you piss him off and that anger comes out. That anger is just out for the entire movie this go around. To help beef up that intimidation factor, you get a much higher amount of blood and gore in this film than we did in the first one, and that's because, like I already kind of briefly mentioned, I would say that the biggest difference between these two films is that this one is definitely much more of a supernatural slasher, whereas the first Black Phone didn't really have a whole lot of slasher elements to it at all. And one thing you have to be able to deliver upon with a slasher movie is you must be able to give out some carnage candy, and I definitely think that this movie does so. It's not the bloodiest or goriest movie you will ever see, but I do think they do enough to scratch that itch that most slasher fans will be having, and it's a mix of CGI and practical. Both the CGI and practical look really well done, so I have no complaints there, and it's a fine addition to help the grabber feel more violent and intimidating. Joining Ethan Hawke, we also see the return of Mason Thames and Madeline McGraw, and they actually kind of swap places for this movie, with the character of Gwen becoming more of the lead and Finney kind of falling back to the supporting character role, but both give really good performances. Mason Thames is a surging up-and-coming young actor, and I feel like he just solidifies that more and more with each performance that he gives. But I also think coming off of these two films, we will begin to see Madeline McGraw get a lot more attention as well. I think she is very talented and has a very bright future, and as she garners more attention to the talent that she is, I think we will begin to see more and more of her. You also get some really solid contributions from the likes of Damian Bashir and Anna Laura that I think really help fill and round out what I felt was a really solid cast overall. The last thing I got for the positives here is I really liked the story that we got. The Nightmare on Elm Street influence is very strong. You could maybe even argue that at times it's a little too close or a derivative of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, but I do think it's very entertaining nonetheless. It made for a lot of really scary tense and trippy moments. And given that when this was announced, I wasn't quite sure what direction they could possibly go in for a Black Phone sequel, I think it was a really smart idea for them to land on. And even though I don't think it was perfect, I do have some complaints that I will get into here in a second. I think on the whole, it was a very well-crafted story and was able to surprise me in some ways that I didn't expect and squash a lot of the concerns or reservations that I had for the film when I was going into seeing it. Moving on to the negatives, and this is where I will get into a couple of the things regarding the story that I wasn't as big of a fan of. My main issue here is if you watch the trailers to this movie, you get a feeling that a main component of this movie is the build-up towards what will be the final confrontation between the grabber and Finney. And though they definitely do get quite a few moments together, I don't think there's nearly enough moments that focus on their dynamic and relationship to one another. Because Gwen becomes more of the focused character, a lot of the grabber's attention goes to her, and I feel like it should have been divvied up a little bit better and kept a lot more on Finney, the character who actually killed him. This is going to be a very unflattering comparison, but it's just one that's fresh on my mind because I'm currently rewatching the entire Halloween franchise for no particular reason, and it got me thinking about Halloween Ends, how they were building up this entire trilogy of films to be the ending to the Laurie Strode and Michael Myers rivalry, and then you get to the last film and all of a sudden they introduce this new character and they spend 90% of the movie focusing on him, and Laurie and Michael and their relationship kind of becomes an afterthought to the movie, and you're just like, why are we not focusing more on them? That's kind of how I felt here with Black Phone 2. There are times and stretches in the movie where Finney does kind of feel like an afterthought, and I don't think that that was a proper way to treat his character. I don't mind Gwen getting a lot of attention, or if she even got equal amount of attention, but I don't think she should have gotten so much attention that Finney kind of begins to become a little irrelevant through big chunks of the movie. That small little similarity is the only thing that I'm comparing between these two films. Don't for a second think that I'm saying Halloween Ends is in the same tier of movie as the Black Phone 2. These movies are on completely opposite ends of a spectrum. I'm just saying that that one critique that I have is similar for both of them, but what they do in Halloween Ends is far more offensive than anything they could have done in this movie. And what amplifies that criticism is that I felt there was a lot of room in this movie to do the things that I'm asking for if it hadn't spent so much time trying to connect the dots and trace things back to the past. Because honestly, a lot of the revelations that are made about these characters' past felt a little too convenient and honestly bordered on cliche, which is kind of disappointing to see in a set of movies that has for the most part been able to show a lot of uniqueness and creativity with both original and borrowed ideas. I just wish we could have gotten a few more moments focusing on Finney and his connection to the grabber and the trauma that he has gone through and is still going through, instead of him just being this brooding pothead teenager like he is for so much of the film, because I like his character so much in the first Black Phone that it is just a bit disappointing to see him get shelved so much for its sequel. So there you guys have it. Those are all of my thoughts for the Black Phone 2. All in all, I really dug this film, and I am trying extremely hard not to fall victim to recency bias and already claim that I like this more than the first one. But given the heavier implementation of slasher elements and the Nightmare on Elm Street influence, and me preferring this more vengeful and imposing version of the grabber, I could easily see just one more rewatch fully confirming that this is the Black Phone film that I prefer of the two. If you're a horror fan or a fan of the first Black Phone, then I definitely recommend you go check this movie out, and I recommend that you do so at a movie theater because I 100% think it's worth every penny for the price of admission. You may not be as crazy about it as I am, you may not prefer it to the first film, but I can't imagine that if you do like that first film, you will come away not liking its sequel at all. But when you do go check it out, make sure to come back to this video, get down in the comments below and tell me what you thought about it. As always, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel as well for more movie reviews. Thank you guys once again for helping me reach 100 subscribers here on YouTube. The road to 200 begins now. I will see everybody in my next video. Peace.